Welcome to Financial Footsteps, Candid Conversations with Financial Leaders, the podcast that takes you deep into the minds of the masters behind the numbers. Join host Chad Dean as he connects with financial leaders as they share their journeys so that we can gain valuable insight from their failures and triumphs. Get ready for candid conversations, behind-the-scenes anecdotes, and practical wisdom that will transform the way you think about your career in finance. Put down the balance sheet and listen in.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Financial Footsteps, where we explore the backgrounds of financial leaders who want to follow in their footsteps. Before I introduce today's guest, I want to explain the purpose of this podcast. I get asked that frequently. So when I place people in a new job, it's a one-on-one relationship. They get to find a great new job. The company gets a good new employee, and I get satisfaction out of that. What I'm trying to do is create a repository for students or for people that are young in their careers that want to learn how somebody achieved the executive title. And thanks to my guests' generosity with their time, we're able to really delve into things and ask really intriguing questions to help out our audience. So having said all that, today's guest is Claire Jansen, who is CFO of Ensemble Investments. Welcome, Claire.
Great. Thanks, Chad. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. So our audience may notice this is our first time not being in studio. So we're going to see how it goes. Hopefully we can pull this off, but we've been doing a little bit of practice beforehand. So I think we can get this done. So Claire, everybody likes to hear a little bit about the personal side of things. So tell us kind of about you and where you're from and where you grew up and that kind of thing.
Sure. Well, Chad, I grew up in Springfield, Virginia, which is in Fairfax County, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. And I spent my whole life there up until college, and then I actually attended George Mason University, which is also in Fairfax, Virginia. Let's see, what else can I tell you? I actually have now raised a family of accountants. That's kind of a little interesting tidbit. Both my husband and I are CPAs, and I have two children that are CPAs now.
Wow. That is really cool. You're the first person that I've ever met that has an entire family of CPAs. That is super cool. So what do you guys do?
It wasn't necessarily always planned that way, but it's worked out. It's been a good career. I don't regret it.
What's the dinner table like? Do you guys talk about accounting issues?
Well, it's funny, when my daughter was growing up, she always told me, Mom, I'm not an accountant. I'm not going to be an accountant. And she used to tease us and said, you guys just talk about debits and credits at the table. But, really we didn't. Occasionally I'd bring home some no-name personnel stories just to share and get some insight and kind of keep everyone entertained. But we didn't really have a lot of accounting conversations at the dinner table.
Well, that is fascinating. That's really cool. So, what do you like to do for fun?
Well, of course, for many years, my free time was spent raising my kids. Now my free time, I've got two golden retrievers, so that's sort of a little bit of a hobby, but I've spent the last 19 years remodeling our house. When we moved here, we bought an older place in North Central Phoenix. Needed a lot of work. It was built in the early 70s, so I originally said that was a 10-year project. It's become a 20-year project, and I think once you finish, you kind of start all over again. I like to travel, but probably get to do that a little bit more one day when I retire.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope that's sooner than later, I guess. So tell me, let's explore. Did you come from a family of accountants? So tell me, what was the genesis of you wanting to go into a career in accounting and finance? Where did that come from?
Well, that's a really good question. Well, I will full disclosure here. My dad was a budget officer for the federal government, and spent his entire career with the government. But I didn't initially have any plans to major in accounting. I did take an accounting class in high school, but when I went to college for the first 2 years, you're a pre-business major, and I thought I was going to be a marketing major. I spent high school in a DECA program and thought, well, maybe I'd like to be a buyer or manager of a department store or something like that. And then I actually met one of my parents' neighbors who was a salesperson for Dow Chemical. And back in those days, that was a rare position for a woman. But she got to travel around and entertain clients. And I thought, well, that sounds really exciting. So I'm going to major in marketing. That's sort of close to sales. That's what I'd like to do. And then one day I was talking to her and she said, well, we hire people from all different majors, psychology majors, chemistry majors, all kinds of majors. So I thought, well, I've taken a couple accounting classes now and did well. So accounting is going to be my backup. So I don't know too many people where accounting is sort of their backup. And I had heard about the CPA exam, this 19 and a half hour exam at the time. And I thought, oh, what a nightmare. I didn't even like taking the 3-hour SAT class, or test. So I thought, that was not something on my mind. But later, as I learned more about, what a CPA in public accounting does, and you're traveling around, you're doing clients, you're not sitting at a desk all day, I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So when I, declared my major, it was accounting, and then sure enough, 3 years later, I was, my senior year getting ready to graduate. Here I was sitting for the CPA exam. So fortunately, I did make it through that, and here I am.
Gotcha. So did you do any internships in either marketing or accounting?
Well, it wasn't a formal internship, but my last, close to my last year, I guess the last semester, I actually took off to study for the CPA exam. But prior to that, I did spend a year at a small accounting firm, and I got a taste of audit. It was, very specialized for auditing condominium associations. But the one thing it did do, Chad, is it gave me something to talk about in my interviews that I got. So, that was very helpful.
So you just decided I'm going to go accounting, and you gave up the marketing dream of
I did,
flying
like I
around
said,
and
once I learned about, what people in public accounting do, I thought this is sort of a combination of what I'm interested in, working, I was kind of fearful of like being stuck at a desk all day. It's kind of funny looking back on it now. Being stuck at a desk all day, doing the same thing day after day, you have this, vision of what an accountant does. And once I learned about public accounting, getting to work on different clients, different assignments all the time, that was what interested me at the time.
awesome. Well, who knows where you would have been if you went to work for Dow Chemical, but you're here now and had a very successful career, so that's great. So tell us about that first job. What was that like, and did you feel prepared when you came out of college?
Well, I actually do feel like my education at George Mason really did prepare me very well for the CPA exam. It doesn't prepare you for all the practical things that you do for sure, but I did get a good education. A lot of it, quite frankly, is on the job training. Sometimes it's hard to apply some of those principles, unless it's something really technical that you learned in school to the real world. But I do feel like it did prepare me well. But, of course, there's a lot of unexpected things as well.
Hmm. Let me ask you this question. This just kind of popped into my mind. Do you, when you see junior, brand new accountants coming out of accounting programs, do you feel that they're as well trained as you were? Is it similar?
Most part, I mean, of course, it depends on the program that they were in. But, now the beauty is that kind of in some ways there's higher expectations with a lot of things that are automated. Quite frankly, they're doing a little less of what I call the grunt work that we had to do. So And then, of course, a lot of them, if they're CPAs or they're studying to be a CPA, have an extra year. I wasn't required to have that when I obtained my CPA. So I think for the most part, they are prepared. But, we all come out of school a little naive, right?
Yeah, that's fact. That's fact. That's what we're trying to do with this podcast is help them understand what they're getting themselves into. So, tell us what you learned in that first job, and how long were you in it?
Well, I actually stayed in public accounting for 5 years. So I was fortunate enough to have 3 promotions during that time period. But the firm I worked for at the time, it was a very large local firm in Washington, D.C. We had a lot of, pretty prestigious clients. But we did whatever back in those days the client needed, if it's an audit or tax return, consulting type engagement. We did whatever they needed. One interesting assignment I can tell you about was a little different than anything I had done at the time, but this was actually kind of a friend of the firm, not a big client of ours, but the managing partner sent me out to this engagement, and the law firm, it was a law firm. They had a challenge with the controller that had been in place for a while, very smart woman, but she wasn't able to get things done in time. Things were late, and he asked me to go out and figure out, what is going on there. So I went out there for a couple of days and came back, and then he said, "Well, what do you think?" And I was a little hesitant to throw her under the bus, but I said, "Well, she's really smart and she's really busy, and very large workload." And he stopped me right there. He said, there are two kinds of people. There are people that make excuses, and there are people that deliver. And so, lo and behold, we made a recommendation to actually for the client to terminate that controller. And then the firm helped hire a new controller. And the new controller came in within 2 months, had everything caught up, and then helped collect, I think it was something like 250,000 of old receivables. And this was a pretty small law firm. And so back in that day, that was a pretty big amount. But I never forgot that, saying that he said to me about, being either, you're going to make excuses or you're going to deliver. So, I consider myself pretty goal oriented, and, you try not to make excuses, right?
Hey, in this world of memes, I think that'd be a good meme. I like that a lot. That was a good early lesson for you,
It was.
for sure. So, what'd you do when you left public accounting?
So when I left public accounting, I actually was moving to Atlanta, and this was the case of being at the right place at the right time, I think. I initially thought, oh, we'll probably take the summer off, look for a job, and on a trip, kind of a house hunting trip that we had to Atlanta, I actually landed with this, really good recruiter who sent me out that very same day to an interview with Equitable Real Estate, which was a very large institutional real estate company. A couple of acquisitions along the way, it later became part of Morgan Stanley. But I worked there for 10 years in several different capacities, and it was a fantastic start to my real estate career.
Wow, that is fortuitous, and I love that it was a recruiter too. Nice plug there. So, walk me through switching to, well, first of all, why did you switch to industry, not just go to another public accounting firm in Atlanta?
It's a good question. I considered it, but probably only for a moment. I felt like, 3 or 5 years was a good time to make that transition. And, I didn't know anyone in Atlanta. And, I guess it was probably a few years off from when I would be responsible for bringing in clients and that sort of things. But, I thought it was a little bit of a disadvantage not having grown up there, not having lived there. But plus, I was ready to try what's life like on the other side.
Why did you move to Atlanta?
Well, actually, we moved with my spouse's an opportunity to get a promotion there with the company that he was with.
Fantastic. Did he also, I mean, this podcast is about him, but just curious, was he in public accounting as well?
He was not, and this was actually a former spouse, I should say. So, But
Gotcha.
he had a CPA as well, so must attract CPAs around me for some reason.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, so tell me the transition the to industry. Tell me about that. Was that a shock? Was it exciting? Tell me about that first role
Yeah,
you had.
it was both, positive and had its challenges. We talk about, leadership and kind of what motivates people. And we had some really good people there, so don't get me wrong. But the one thing, in public accounting, you have a lot of type A's, right? A lot of people trying to really move to the next level. So as manager, when you'd ask something, somebody for something, you would, generally get it pretty quickly, right away. And that was the transition that I had to do when I got there, because you had people that you needed things from that were maybe in another department, or maybe they just, were kind of a steady Eddie, right? And so you had to learn to work with, how do I get what I need, and without being too demanding. And so you really had to adjust your leadership style a little bit there.
How did you learn how to do that? Just patience? Is that
Yeah, patience for sure, and just sometimes it's asking questions and just better communicating. Not just saying, "Hey, I need this. Can I get this by Monday?" Or whatever date it is. Kind of explaining the due date, kind of working around what is your priority? When do a lot of times if you ask them, when do you think you can get it to me? Sometimes you can actually get it earlier than you might expect. So it's a give and take. And then, sometimes obviously working through that person's manager,
sure?
make sure
And
everyone's on the same page.
yes. And I find empowering people as well, and letting them know how
Mhm.
important their work in the process is. And if they understand what their purpose is, I feel that they take a little bit
Mhm.
more ownership and do a better job. So, so you said 10 years, and obviously you were getting promotions along the way. So kind of walk us through that 10 years
Mhm.
and how you grew in your role.
Right. Well, the first role I had was really, it was kind of an interesting combination. I had half of my work was corporate tax work, which I had a tax background, but not so much all this multi-state work. So I had to kind of pick up and learn it myself, because the person I was working for was not, a tax person. But I actually really appreciated that, having the opportunity to figure it out and learn on my own. The other half of the work I had was, accounting work that didn't fit in the nice, neat little pension fund box that Equitable's clients were. So I had like a REIT that was a deal that we did with a large institutional player. I had a group of properties with some international Japanese investors. And I had then it kind of grew along the way. We got this Netherlands Antilles company. They all had a lot of unique um, requirements, if you will. One of them was publicly issued, not traded. So I got to do some SEC reporting there. It was a deal we'd done with Merrill Lynch Hubbard. And so it was quite exciting. But I did that for about 4 years. And then the company actually was restructuring its accounting, not affecting my group per se, but they were centralizing a lot of the accounting for the various pension funds and other clients. And we had someone that actually decided not to relocate from another city. And I thought, well, I'll throw my name in the hat. I quite frankly didn't think I had much of a chance of getting it, but I applied for it, and lo and behold, was selected. So I went from 5 to 25 people overnight that I was managing. And I actually did have to invest some time, of course, in performing in that, because when they asked me to do it, when they selected me, they said, well, we're going to move you in this position, but you're going to have to prove yourself for a year and a half. And we're not going to give you right now a raise other than, your annual raise. So you're not going to get a promotion. You're not going to get a raise. And yet my responsibilities grew. And, I was willing to invest the time to do that. And so it obviously paid off in the long run. And it was a fantastic opportunity there. And I also, took some of the work that I had with me. I mentioned some of those interesting structures that didn't fit in their nice, neat little box. I got quite a few more of them at the time, and I sort of became the unofficial accounting new business person. So some of my peers who were terrific people were really reluctant to take on more work, but I, basically my attitude was, as long as they're giving me a resource to work on it, I'll bring it on. And so, a lot of challenges, but got to do a lot of interesting things. And I think that is actually, one of the things that got me promoted in that position ultimately.
What was that title?
I was vice president of institutional accounting.
Okay. Why do you think that you got chosen for that job?
Well, that is a really good question. I had some of, I had done, some of the accounting kind of at the more at the reporting level for that position. So I think that experience helped. But hopefully they looked at, some potential that I had, some leadership potential, and I'm very grateful. I'm still in touch with my boss this day, and that selected me. And it's kind of interesting because over the years, I've either worked for her or she's worked for me in either a permanent or consulting capacity. So that's a good question. But sometimes, you may not have done the exact position, but if you can think of examples of something, when you're interviewing that, you've got the same skill set, maybe let's say you haven't managed a group of people, but you've mentored people or you've trained people, some of those characteristics can be really helpful in interviewing. You certainly don't want to overstate what you've done, but if you can, kind of create some analogies to some of your own experience, that helps.
So you get in this new job. Tell us about that. Were you natural?
I'm not sure about that, but I certainly, learned along the way. I would say kind of in terms of leadership, in public accounting, I think initially my approach was to treat everyone fairly, of course, and treat everyone the same. But your tendency, at least my tendency, was to expect everyone to be like I am. And of course, that isn't the case. And where, I certainly hope I treat everyone fairly, you really do have to adjust your management style. So, that was, certainly a learning experience. So I'm certainly not pretending to do everything right the first time, but hopefully I've learned a few things along the way.
Hmm. Do you do you subscribe, or how did you learn to be a leader? Was it purely through trial and error? Is that how you got better at it?
Well, one thing, and again, this does go back to public accounting, but I was fortunate to work for a number of different managers, partners, people at different levels. And I think sometimes you learn from the styles that you admire as much as the styles that don't work so well for you. So you try to take a little bit of, a little bit of each, if you will. I'm not going to act this way, but I'm going to model this other behavior. So that's what I tried to do. Certainly, made some mistakes along the way. Hiring is a difficult thing. I like to think I'm pretty good at judging people, but you're not always right in that. So that can be a challenge if you don't have the right team underneath of you.
That's an absolute fact. And it is so hard hiring people, and it's really strange that they could go through the entire process and you think that they're going to be the one, and then they get in the seat and you're just trying to figure out where was the disconnect. And it's one of the big mysteries in business, I believe. So there's something interesting that you said in there, and it's the challenge that you had of expecting people to work as hard as you do. That's something that I as well had to get over. It was when I first became a leader, actually the owner of my firm, I was out running hard out front and expecting everybody to be right there alongside of me. And I turned around and they're all lagging way back there. And so I had to learn how to ask them what they wanted, because it wasn't what I wanted. It's what they want to achieve. And how do I help them achieve it, and get them to really understand what's their why, what drives them in life, right? That's so important. So that's really interesting, but absolute fact on hiring and having a great team that really leads to tremendous success. Do you feel, and I ask every guest this question, do you feel that leadership is natural or learned?
Well, I think it's a combination of both for sure. I think some people are maybe naturally more introverted, or some people, they're all about the task. And then, some people, the task and the process. And sometimes you've got to separate the people from the task and the process. So I think it's both. And I think, we continue to learn. You're, involved interacting with and managing different people all throughout your career. So I think we're continually learning on that. But I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you this question, and it may be challenging to put you into your previous self, but it's funny when I talk to candidates that maybe are in the 7 to 8 year range, I always ask them, what's their long-term thought? What do they want to be? And a lot of them don't have an answer. They're just like, I don't know. I'm just kind of going through and seeing what develops. Is there a point where you realized that you wanted to be in the executive seat someday? Do you recall that moment?
Don't really. And I like to, I'm again always considered myself to be pretty goal oriented, but I didn't have a certain title or anything in mind, I guess. But I think, as I got closer to the higher level seats, I guess, probably, maybe, as a VP, you look ahead and you admire those, or maybe not, above you, and you really want to be part of the strategy, part of the decisions, and not just the assistant, the person that's helping that person. Um, so I don't know if it's a specific moment, but I think as you get closer to it, you can, you got your eyes on the ball, you can see it a little better.
Hmm. Okay. So you left Ensemble, looks like, right before 2000. What was the decision there?
Oh, when I left Equitable.
Hmm.
Well, yeah, I skipped, I guess, the last position that I had there. So I had three different positions. The last one was really a project that I worked on. And so that one, I was implementing a credit analysis function to the entire company. I, didn't have a huge background in that, but that was, really sort of a project to, come up with a framework. And this is really how do you evaluate a company, whether it be a tenant, a JV partner, a borrower. And so it kind of brought me a little bit out of the pure accounting mode, if you will. I had to travel around the country and train people once, I completed that. And then ultimately, we, put it in place and the project was done. And our company had been acquired, by another company at the time. And so I did move on for a couple years, and I worked in the non-traded REIT industry, both for a company that was raising a lot of funds, and then I worked for a law firm that we were out doing the due diligence on REIT securities offerings. So that really broadened my background to a whole nother level, if you will.
So you fell into the real estate bucket and just kind of stayed there, huh?
I did, although I will say, until maybe more recently, each company I worked with was a little bit different. So, when I went to work for the company when I left when I left Equitable Real Estate, they described themselves as a securities company. They owned real estate, but they were out selling, REIT securities and partnership interests, if you will. And, of course, later on, when I came to Phoenix, I went to work for a real estate developer. Well, I'd never worked for a developer either. So it was all in the real estate realm, but very, very different companies.
So tell me about the move to Phoenix. What was that? How did that happen?
Yeah, that was definitely a big move for me, and that was really my first realm into senior management, which is why I picked up and moved. I had actually, on a personal level, just been remarried a year before, and of course, I shared the opportunity decision with my current husband. And, we looked at it and just thought this is an opportunity of a lifetime. So, he was ready to look for something different himself. But what happened was a recruiter that, like a former CFO had referred me to for a completely different job, called me like a year after the first one and told me about this position in Phoenix. And I was traveling quite a bit, quite frankly. I kind of forgot about it. Then he called me after the holidays and caught me off guard. I'd been really busy, and I thought, well, why not? I'll go out and interview for it. And, it was a slow process, which was good because it was a really big decision. But they flew me out, they flew me to the parent company in Minneapolis. They flew me to California to meet a couple of the other executives, and it was a CFO role, and it actually was able to utilize some of the skills I already had. It was a brand new position, so there was a lot of opportunity there. But I'd only lived in the DC area, Northern Virginia, as well as Atlanta. So moving to Phoenix was quite different. And of course, at this point, I'm uprooting two kids and moving them across the country. So it was a pretty big decision.
Now, out of the whole country, right? Since they're bringing somebody in from Atlanta, out of the whole country, you got chosen again for that position, right? And it was a stretch position for you. Why do you think they chose you?
That is a really good question. I think that I had enough again. I had pretty sophisticated experience at that point, but I think that once you get to that particular level, the technical skills are sort of assumed, if you will. I mean, you kind of are at a minimum level generally when you're being interviewed, or at least they expect it. And so, really, what it is at that point is a fit. So the culture of the company really seemed to fit. It was an interview, of course, on both sides, as it always is. But I had talked to, of course, all the other executives, and it was very interesting because several of them had actually worked for the company, left the company, and then came back. And to me, that said something, well, they thought the grass was greener on the other side, but it wasn't. And, of course, the company, valued them enough to bring them back. It's sort of an interesting little tidbit, but, it did make a difference. And, it was a very, again, you know, um, favorable, package and everything for me. And again, an opportunity to, be a senior leader in the company. So, I think it was really an interview on both sides.
That's fascinating. That's great. So, what advice would you give to someone that's interviewing for their first CFO title?
That is a really good question. Let's see. Well, again, providing real examples of the work that you've done, where, they're not looking for just, okay, I have these technical skills. They're looking for where did you add value to the company? So at that level, it's a whole, well, where it kind of gets, gradually more strategic type questions, the higher up you go. But at that point, they're looking for your leadership skills. What value do have you provided? At other companies, give us some examples, and what can you do for me, basically? How can you enhance this company? And so you try to understand, what are their challenges, and you're asking them questions, and trying to come up with, okay, where do I fit into that? How can I help this company?
Hmm. Yeah, people that have difficulty articulating their value are often passed over. You've really
Mhm.
got to understand. And what I suggest to people is as they go back when they're going into before they go into an interview, go back and look at their previous positions and actually write down what are they proud of that they accomplished, the value that
Mhm.
they provided, and what challenge did they have to overcome. Because people want to know that you can overcome challenges. You're not making excuses, right?
Mhm.
So that's something that I recommend to people. So when and while we're on the subject of interviewing, because I always find that it's part of my job, right, is talking to people and training them how to interview and debriefing them and stuff. What do you look for in individuals when you're interviewing them?
Okay. Well, I actually have three things that I look for, and quite frankly, maybe it's to a different degree, but really the same similar things for every position. So one, you're looking for somebody that's smart. Now, I'm not looking necessarily for a 4.0 grad, especially for an AP position, right? But somebody that's got aptitude to learn. So that generally, a lot of times you figure that out before you even interview them, right? Secondly, probably one of the most important things is I'm looking for somebody that takes initiative. So you talked about what are these things that this candidate is proud of? I'm asking them those questions. Where did you add value? If they're coming from public accounting, what did you do versus following last year's work papers? What did you do different than just following along what your, predecessor did? And, I'm looking for somebody that really has goals, that has accomplished something, that somebody that's proud of, what they've done. They've got ideas to bring to the table. And then the third thing I look for is someone that is team oriented. This is the hardest thing, at least I found, to interview for, because what kinds of questions do you ask them, right? And how do you know it's not just BS, for lack of a better word? Very hard to tell. Sometimes you can glean a little from their references, but those are the three things that I value most.
It's interesting. My two children, neither one of which are going to be a CPA, but my two children, one is straight A's, and the other one not straight A's. When I always joke that when my son that gets straight A's, when he got a B, he cried. When my other son got a B, I cried because I was so happy he didn't get a C. So it's funny how different from the same parents, same household, the same food, everything, how different they were. But what's interesting is the one that didn't get the good grades has better street smarts. And so,
Absolutely.
right. So there's aptitude for learning how to take a test, but then there's aptitude for learning how to handle complex situations, which is a different skill set. And so I don't know, do you have a way of assessing that?
Assessing their street smart, really, just conversation, I would say. It's difficult, but I do have one thing along those lines when you're asking for, what would you recommend to students, or, somebody pretty junior. I wasn't a straight A student. I was, a pretty good student and in the Business Honor Society, but I also worked during college, not full time, but, quite frankly, it was more freedom to have my own spending money. I didn't, quite frankly, really have to work. But I also participated in a number of activities and took leadership positions. And so I was, as my mother used to say, kind of burning the candle at both ends at times. But those activities and those leadership positions, I believe, got me more interviews than some of my friends had that had higher grades than I did. And it was a good time when I graduated, so I will say that. But I ended up with 4 job offers when I graduated from college. But a lot of that, wasn't because I had, I didn't have a 4.0, so it wasn't because I had a 4.0. It was because, they could see, I believe, the leadership qualities that I had in addition to, being decently smart.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. The lead, I always encourage people internships and step out of the box, right? And work into those
Mhm.
leadership things. It's probably that it's not for everybody, but if you do it and you learn, then the mystery's taken off, right? And you learn a lot. So great advice. Fantastic. So if you that can you think of like an important move or a circumstance rather than just pure luck that helped you get to where you are today?
A particular move. Well, I would say the one that I talked about, the business credit analysis role that I took, because I really had to step outside my comfort zone to take that role. And it really developed me, outside of accounting. And as I mentioned, I traveled around the country, first finding out what kind of analysis are people doing now? How are you going about this work? Which I found out there wasn't a lot, right? But I got to meet with the portfolio managers and the asset managers and the capital transactions folks. And the team of I reported to a team of people basically in the executive office, and so it gave me a lot of exposure. Now exposure also is a lot of risk, right? But that was a particularly good move that I made. um, let's see. And I think getting the variety, my as I mentioned, my father worked for, it was a couple different agencies, but same, federal government his whole career. I have a couple other relatives that been fortunate enough to work for the same, large companies their whole career. But for someone in my particular industry in real estate, I think it's actually been advantageous to work for several different companies. Now, on the flip side, I don't think it's great to these people that jump ship every year. Really, you need to invest time and contribute to a company, if you will. Sometimes it's you can't plan for it, right? If the company's sold or downsizing or something like that. But I think overall the variety of experiences has helped me. Again, taking the risk when I took that business credit analysis role when I moved to Phoenix. I mean, there was some big risk, and I had, not just for me, but my whole family involved, right? And that whole move. So sometimes don't be afraid to take a risk.
Oh, fantastic. You mentioned something extremely important that I don't know how much it gets talked about, but people don't understand. You can make a couple of moves at the beginning of your career, right? It just wasn't the right fit. You haven't learned what is the right fit for you. But at some point in year 5, 6, 7, 8, you should be able to figure out. And you mentioned it earlier, you're going in and you're interviewing them as well. If you keep finding yourself in a situation where a company goes out of business or they've had 3 CFOs and there's a bunch of churn in the company, that's stuff that you need to look for going in to, because you don't want to be the person, I call them a job hopper, that has a bunch of moves early on in their career, because it impacts your resume, it impacts your marketability, it is immediate red flags that you have to overcome. That's the first thing you don't want to have to overcome in an interview is, why have you
Hmm.
had so many jobs? Right. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Hmm.
I encourage people all the time that are 2 years here, 2 years here, 1 year, and they're 2 years in. And of course, if you look at their history, oh, it's time to make a move again. But it's not. You need to stay 3 years. You need to stay 4 years. So I'll get on the phone with them and I'll just be straight up with them and tell them that. And maybe they listen to me, maybe they don't. But people need to do a better job of interviewing the company and making sure it's going to be a cultural fit for them. So that's kind of summarizing a lot of what you said, but that's extremely important. So today, so now you took another CFO role. You're with, and that was the next role was where you're currently at with the Ensemble.
Well, not the next role, but did you want me to chat about the ensemble? Or
Sure. Yeah,
okay,
tell
I
us about
was going to
ensemble.
say
Sorry, I was
had
gonna
a
say
couple
do that earlier, but I screwed that up, so
a couple of roles in between there, including both consulting and permanent roles. But yes, I had left a company and quite frankly, a little bit burned out at that point. And of course, I'm a little bit more on the backside of my career here. And I thought I want to start my own consulting firm. So I took my time after taking a little bit of a break. After working, I've actually started working when I was 15 and a half. So I pretty much worked either part-time or full-time most of those years, of course. Um, so I put together some marketing materials, a website, a logo, formed an LLC, and decided to start consulting business. Now, COVID hit right around then, but lo and behold, didn't affect it. I was getting some pretty good referrals, and one of the referrals I got was here at Ensemble. And it was initially, I had no plans to join Ensemble or any other company permanently, but came on board. And my predecessor had left the company. I did get to spend a little bit of time with him, but because the company was a bit understaffed, I mean, this is typical. A company will grow and not necessarily grow, the support functions, right? So they were understaffed and then a bit behind. So it was a bit of a challenge. And I brought in one consultant of my own and then had to use a recruiter to bring in some other consultants to help get, the things that were a little bit behind caught up, and then help recommend a team. What would the team look like that's needed? Help them hire that. But then after about 5 months, the company approached me, and it was about the time I started really liking it here as well, and said, well, would you be interested in a permanent role? And what would that look like? And so, what I basically said to them, I'm like, yes, I would be interested. And what I'm interested in is a senior leadership role. I want to be part of the senior management team. And they said, great. We were hoping you would say that. And so we made it work. And so after 5 months, now it's been 4 years that I've been here. So I joined the company and I haven't looked back.
fantastic. What does Ensemble do?
So Ensemble is a developer, owner, operator of commercial real estate. So we currently are developing hotels and multifamily properties, as well as mixed-use properties. We have a number of hotels and other properties in, 12 different areas, but mostly California, Arizona, and then we have a very large 15-year master master plan project that we're developing at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. So it's very, very exciting. We are not like a third party manager, and we have outside investors. Some are institutional, some are kind of friends and family individuals. So it's quite a mix of different structures and real estate.
And that's one of your projects behind you there in Sedona?
Yeah, that's Las Posadas. That's in the Oak Creek area of Sedona. It's a boutique hotel there.
It's gorgeous. If nobody's been there and you're in Sedona, just stop in for a meal or something. It's an amazing property, and the location is gorgeous. But that is a a beautiful picture. So I want to know, and I think you kind of touched on it, but I want to know, what would you tell your younger self?
Hmm. That is a really good question. Um, you've got to basically, have pretty thick skin. That was a little bit harder when in my younger days. Um, somebody would criticize you. Um, that would be hard. I've built up a little bit thicker skin now. The other thing I would say is be open to feedback. And I think, I did a pretty good job of that, but I think we're all sometimes a little bit defensive, right? If somebody criticizes you for something. And I have one example back, and this was my Equitable days, and it was a pretty favorable evaluation overall. But my manager had talked to one of the portfolio managers and had some feedback that I, quite frankly, disagreed with. And so I think I got probably a little bit defensive on it. And she said to me, "Well, perception is reality." So I did take that to heart, and backed off when she said that, and went and actually talked to the portfolio manager, took him to lunch, and we developed a much better relationship. So I would say be open to feedback is really important. And as a leader, you move up. It's not a popularity contest. I mean, of course, I knew that, but living with it is another thing. You're going to have either jealous peers, or everyone likes to criticize the boss, right? So not everyone is going to like you. And you might even have a change of a boss from time to time, or a different culture that doesn't fit. So sometimes you've got to um, you know be you either got to deal with it and like it, or you got to move on, right? But I'd say having to develop a little bit of a thick skin.
Yeah, and be able to take criticism.
Exactly.
That's sound advice. If you get defensive about it, you're not going to learn. Of course, it also depends how it was delivered, and
Right, of
that's
course.
right. That's part of becoming a leader is
Hmm.
how do you actually provide that feedback?
Right.
That's a skill that is learned, I believe.
Yeah, and on the flip side, it's easy to manage high performers, right? The challenge are the ones that are not as high performing. Okay, is it an attitude or an aptitude issue? And how do you turn that around? And they say, don't invest too much time in the really low performers, right? But it's a balance.
Well, there's some people that believe in the hire fast, fire fast method. I'm not good at that. I take
Yeah,
it
it's not.
personally if somebody's not succeeding. I feel like it's
Right.
my fault. So sometimes I'll invest too much time. So, and this is one of the questions that I gave you in advance, but it's something that listeners suggested that I ask leaders, and it's something along the lines of: are there any trends in accounting and finance? Obviously, an easy one to pick on is artificial intelligence, but are
Mhm.
there any trends that you think are going to affect the future of accounting and finance for better or worse?
Right. Well, I think the challenge is that we don't have as many accounting graduates, right? A lot of people are choosing not to major in accounting, or they major in accounting and they go into consulting, like my daughter. Sometimes those positions are more lucrative, luring people, into other things. So I think it's going to be challenging for those that, for the industry. And I think public accounting is going to have to change a little bit, because, we were just willing to work, however many hours it took. If it was 80 hours a week, you work 80 hours a week because that's what needed to get done. I think, today's graduates are not all willing to do that. And quite frankly, I don't blame them in some cases for that, right? I think AI is going to, it's going to be interesting. I think the positive thing about that, and some other, automation efforts that have been put in place the last few years, is that it actually raises the level of work, high quality of work that you're expected to do and that you have the opportunity to do, right? Because there's a little less grunt work, right? A lot of that transaction work is now automated. So it's more interesting work for graduates. So I would hope they would be attracted to that. But at the same time, sometimes you can learn a lot from doing a little bit of that grunt work for a while. So I think the expectations are going to be higher, that you can kind of synthesize and understand that without actually going through, say, some of the testing and some of that real entry level work that you do. But I think overall it's going to be positive in terms of AI.
How do you think that the public accounting firms change the perception of their cultures?
Hmm. Well, I don't know about changing the perception. They have to change reality a little bit, but it is challenging because, right now, some of the accounting I'm hearing the accountants are not necessarily paid as much as some of their peers, so that's attracting them away. But I'm also hearing from the CPA firm partners that the accountants are wanting to work less but make more money. So, it is a challenge for them. It might cut into the profits of, the partners. Nobody's wanting to do that, right? It may actually raise the rates for clients, to be able to hire those accountants. But they, definitely, need to be, flexible. I know accounting firms have talked about this for years, but, it needs to be the reality. I think some firms have done a better job of it than others, but, you know, internally, I understand the firms too, because when you're losing people or you have a lot of turnover, guess what? There's more work left to do. It's hard to say, well, don't worry about it, just work 40 or 45 hours a week, right? They have a book of business to, be able to, that they need to serve the clients for. So it's kind of a challenge all the way around.
And I think they're seen as a training ground, right? It's good. Go into public accounting, go get your 3 or 4 years, and then you've got your ticket punched for the rest of your career, which
Mhm.
frankly is probably true. So
I
um,
cannot disagree with that at all. I do not regret it. It was kind of grueling work at times, but I don't regret my experiences there at all. And I think it definitely, you talk about propelling your career, that some of those things I learned have stuck with me, my entire career.
mhm. Let me ask you a question. I talk to candidates sometimes that say they chose to go get an MBA as opposed to a CPA. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I do think a lot of companies value that. Sometimes, had I wish I'd taken the time to do that. Perhaps I think a lot of it you can learn on the job, but it is a valuable. You do, learn a lot of valuable things in those programs. I know they have a lot of what do you call it, like scenarios and real life situations that you're, dealing with case studies and things like that. I think it's important to get experience though before you actually try to, go do an MBA program, because then you've got some real life things to apply, in that particular program. But particularly, I think if you're wanting to do something that maybe is outside the pure technical accounting mode, I think it can't hurt. Now, will it get you more money? Maybe at some places, but maybe not so much at other places. But if you're looking to do something more in finance, I think that, in some cases, it's almost required.
Hmm. I also hear that there's a trend in paying. You have to pay accountants more, right, or else they're going to leave. But they're paying the discrepant. There's the difference between a CPA accountant and a non CPA accountant. The pay gap is diminishing because there's such a high need for accountants. And I hear that that's causing a little bit of it's disgruntling CPAs because they're like, look, we went through the work and got the CPA, and now this person doesn't have a CPA and they're making 5,000 less than me or even the same amount of money.
Mm.
And so that's something that also the pay in accounting is definitely something that needs to be addressed. I think to also combat people not wanting to go into
Mm.
accounting, because you go through a lot of
Mm.
work, you get your CPA, and if you're going to be getting paid 85,000, is all that extra work worth it? Unless you're super passionate about it, right?
Mm. I actually think it helps you in the long run. I do think that you're right that probably for a senior accountant, it may not always be that much distinction, but I do think that investing that time and getting your CPA, will pay off in the long run.
It's a differentiator, and it shows that you're an achiever, right? And you can achieve a goal. That's not something easy. And so, yeah, so
I wish I
that's
could
something.
hire more of them.
Well, there aren't enough. That's true. There aren't enough. Okay, so the final question, it's kind of a summary question because you've said a lot of it, but what advice would you give to someone just starting out or very early on in their career that wants to achieve your title?
Well, I would say for one, the biggest thing I would say is always believe in yourself. Again, you might have some knocks along the way, but you are your biggest cheerleader. So what's going to help you get the next role and move up is believing in yourself. And along those lines, you're setting goals for yourself, and I think that's what's going to propel you all along the way is your belief in yourself.
Well, it's setting goals. Not enough people do it. And there's different goals that you can set, right? You can set an intermediate goal, a long-term goal, a stretch goal. So that's very sound advice. Well, our time is up. That was actually over an hour. So I want to thank you for your time. I know the time is everybody's most precious possession. So I want to thank you for sharing that and your insights that you gave to our guest today.
Well, thank you, Chad. Hopefully, I mentioned something that will be helpful to someone.
I know you did. You mentioned a lot. So if somebody does have some additional questions, how do you suggest they get in touch with you?
Well, that's a good question. They can email me at cjanssen, JANSSEN @ensemble.net.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciate that. And I live on LinkedIn as a recruiter. That is probably one of the first things I open up in the morning. So if you need to get in touch with me, feel free to reach out to Chad Dean on LinkedIn. And that's a wrap for our show today.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Financial Footsteps, Candid Conversations with Financial Leaders. We encourage you to apply the knowledge and wisdom shared in these conversations to your own career. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback is important to us as we continue to bring you more candid conversations and thought-provoking insights from successful financial leaders.